Hey guys, Carlos Newton. I'm here at Hannibal TV. I'm about to do my interview as the first Canadian UFC champion.
How old were you when you started in martial arts, and what got you into martial arts?
I was 5 years old when I started martial arts, and my stepfather started teaching me karate and so forth. I was pretty young, and growing up in the Caribbean was a good place to start. I did my Karate Kid thing in the ocean. And then came to Canada when I was 9 years old, and got into it even more. Yeah.
Now, who did you start training with when you came to Canada?
Thomas Sharky, former instructor, member, and captain of the Emergency Task Force in Toronto.
So you mentioned karate was what you were starting with. What got you more into the jiu-jitsu side of things and grappling? Was that Tom?
Yeah, Tom, my first instructor, Thomas Sharky, got me, pretty much into everything. Yeah, he introduced me to boxing, judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, taekwondo, everything. Yeah, he told me there was only one rule: win.
And you competed for the Abu Dhabi Combat Club at a pretty young age. How did that come about?
Competing in Abu Dhabi came about just from, going to local tournaments, going to tournaments wherever I could find tournaments, and competing and doing well in tournaments, and getting out there, meeting other athletes, and competing and training with them. After a while, word spreads. Over in Canada, this guy's pretty good. Over in the US, this guy's pretty good. In Brazil, these guys are pretty good. And the way the Abu Dhabi Combat Challenge works is take the best from each country and invite them out. So on the Canadian side, I was given that honor to represent Canada, and that's how I ended up there.
And what was that experience like?
The experience of competing in Abu Dhabi was pretty awesome. Yeah, it was. For me, it was really my first trip to the Middle East. Or that part of it. I've been to other countries in the Middle East, but Abu Dhabi was very unique. Unique in that the way they ran the competition and treated the athletes and so forth, it was really special. It was really, they were very respectful and showed a lot of, I guess you'll say, prestige and honor to the sport. And, for all of us that were there competing, we knew that we're taking part in something special. It was nice.
And you had a sparring session with Gracie around 1995 that was witnessed by about 200 people apparently. What were the circumstances surrounding that?
1995, holy mac. I don't remember. 1995, I was pretty young. I was a little kid. I was in my teens. And the sparring session came about from going to seminars and training seminars with Hoist, including Hicks and Gracie. Jorge and Gracie was there with Hoist, and I just had to go at him. I wanted to try. He lives in California, right? And for me to get a shot at Hoist was I figured to myself, I'm never gonna get that opportunity again. So respectfully request a little session, and he obliged, and he gave me a spanking, but it was really good. For me, it was it kind of made him feel more human after getting a chance to roll with him. And I was young. I was a really young kid, and for me to get a chance to have that one-on-one session with someone who you highly respect, and know that you want to be able to accomplish things on the same level and compete on the same level as them, it was really nice to get that shot. And Hoyes too is he's an awesome guy. when it comes to my fight career and my career in martial arts, I do owe him a lot just for spending the time with me, seeing him over the years, and our the friendship and relationship that we've had over the years really to me helped foster my ability as an athlete to grow, and made it a very inviting place to train and go out there and try to be your best. All the encouragement and support they gave me was very greatly appreciated, and I thank them very much.
And when you had your first MMA fight, it was on an Indian reserve outside of Montreal. Those were the days where MMA wasn't really sanctioned, and there was a lot of threats that the police were going to come and arrest the fighters or close down the show. I was just wondering if you could tell us what was going through your mind going into that fight. You're fighting a guy that's not in your weight class. There was no weight classes back then, and all the hoopla surrounding it.
My first fight was I was in Kanawake, Indian Reserve, and those were the days where they called it no holds barred. It wasn't called MMA. So I think back a bit now, and my concern for athletes who are coming up now about having safe rules and so forth, and making sure it's a safe sport for them. I'm like, I wish somebody did that for me. I wish I did it for myself. I'm a lot smarter now, I'm a lot more mature now, and what was going through my head back then? Not much outside of how am I gonna beat this opponent, and how am I gonna perform. I'm pretty sure those were my focuses at the time. Controlling my jitters and so forth. The guy did outweigh me by 106 pounds, so I figured making sure I did my best was probably front and center.
And it was a highly competitive fight as well.
It was. The fight was pretty awesome for me, because again, I was in there. I went in there with some reckless abandon, and I think it really kind of set the tone for me in all my other fights. Because after that, I soon began fighting guys in my own weight class, and lo and behold, they seemed pretty light. By that point. So to me, it was a real building experience. I definitely wasn't afraid going into any fight. I was always pretty calm. I guess that happens when you go against the 286-pound monster your first fight. All the others after that same size as me. Oh my god.
Do you have any tips, speaking of that, for like nervousness going into a fight, for like MMA fighters who sometimes, I've heard of Tito Ortiz throwing up before fights, he got so nervous, like ways of calming yourself?
For me, the ways of calming myself was control your breathing. You have to learn to control your breathing. I remember one time Hicks and Gracie took me aside, and he explicitly told me that and kind of demonstrated how to do that. And for me, control of my breathing was something that was key. It was the main thing to do. The movement, the breath is the movement of the mind. If you control your breathing, keep it smooth and calm, your mind will stay smooth and calm. You'll stay in a state of awareness rather than let your mind race away and your breath starts racing, and before you know it, you're like a runaway train. You gotta keep it under control, control your breathing, and the rest follows, and you drink lots of water.
Now, you went to Japan pretty soon after that first fight. Was that just from people hearing about your various successes and fights and you got invited there, or were you sending tapes over there?
The invitation to go to Japan came from Japan, and after some time, guys just, word after that fight against Jean Revere in Kanawaki on the Indian Reserve, it was a surprise to everyone to see a kid who was 180 pounds compete against a guy who was 286 pounds and kind of hold his own. And they just figured, you know what? We need someone to fight the next bout here in Tokyo against the middleweight world champion. Let's call this Canadian kid. He looks pretty tough. So yeah, I got invited to do that. Yeah, I guess they figured, I was crazy enough to take the fight.
And what was that experience like, going over to Japan to fight for the first time?
That was awesome. That was a huge milestone for me, because for me, Japan was the place to be. It was the place to go and compete at least once. It's the epicenter of martial arts. It's the birthplace of it in terms of jiujitsu, BJJ, and all the modern martial arts that you see today. Japan is the place where a lot of that knowledge was refined and shared with everyone else. I just wanted to, at least once in my life, have the opportunity to see directly for myself where it came from. And the day I got invited to go to Japan, I said, well, it's gonna happen. And I was one of those kids that grew up watching those martial arts movies, you see Kumite, only the best got invited to that kind of stuff. So again, too, it was a pat on my back saying, you know what, you're pretty good at this. You're getting invited to Japan. Only the best get to go to Japan.
Speaking of martial arts movies, have you seen the new kickboxer movies that have come out in recent years?
Seen a few, yeah. Seen a few. Still enjoy them. Yeah.
Now, you had a fight with Eric Paulson in Japan where you ended up beating him. What are your memories of that fight?
My memories of that fight were, that was my second fight of my career. And it was the first time I got invited to Japan. And again, I know at that point too, I was probably a little green to be taking such a fight. I was young. I didn't have much experience. Only had two fights at that time. Yeah, I had a lot of amateur fights and so forth. I competed in judo, boxing, wrestling. A lot of jiu-jitsu, and that was one thing. But to go in there and compete against a guy, and at the time what was called no holds barred in Japan, it was called Vale Tudo, and go in there and get hit for real and throwing real punches. It was a big step from the amateur side of things. It was a huge step, and just the environment too. Fighting Eric Paulson in Japan, I think we fought in front of something like 64,000 people. So keeping it together too was probably a challenge, but I kept it together, and I survived it.
And he's a bit of a catch wrestling expert, and he's gone on to train Brock Lesnar and a lot of other famous fighters. What do you think of catch wrestling as a grappling style?
For me, anything's a style as long as it's effective. We can use labels to help us point to certain concepts and so forth. But I'm the type of guy, I don't get caught up in the names. I'm just technique's technique. It doesn't matter what you call it. Awareness is awareness. No matter what you call it. And technique is something that if it works in that moment that you need it, that's technique. Good technique. If it doesn't work at that moment, it's bad technique. So those two things can instantly swap places. One moment ago what was good technique could be the worst technique to be deploying in the next moment. And so don't try to adhere to anything, just let it flow. And like my first sensei said, there's only one rule: win. Everything else, you gotta let it go.
And you ended up having some fights with Pride, which was the biggest company in the world at the time for MMA, and you had a really famous fight against Sakuraba. Could you share with us some of your memories of that fight?
Oh, well, you know, fighting Sakuraba was great. It kind of reminded me of my fight with Eric Paulson. You know, huge crowds again, and you know, it was a time too where Japan was really on the map when it came to the big fights. You know, they were holding shows in Tokyo, some of them upwards of 90,000 people. And yeah, it was really, 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 really intense stuff at the time. You know, the rules in Pride were different from anywhere else, really. You know, you weren't allowed to elbow, but if the guy was down, you were allowed to like soccer kick him in the head. So it had that, you know, compared to say MMA in North America, where because of elbows and so forth, there was a real big chance you can get cut and so forth. That was contrasted with, you know, Japan, where there weren't no elbows. You know, you weren't getting bloodied and stuff of it like that, but you can get really hurt, right? You get caught the wrong moment, and a guy kicks you in the head while you're down. You can not get up from that, and I think it kind of gave it a real another level of intensity that just wasn't there in North America, at least not for me. The guys too, just the way the weight classes worked, a lot of times, you know, we were able to fight guys outside our weight class in Japan. So it gave it a whole nother aura of, wow, you know, this is the big time. And, you know, fighting in Japan, the way Japanese fans and the crowd sees it is completely different. You know, over in North America, people, you know, they train, they cheer and so forth, right? But in Japan, you could really see that, feel that, wow, they're in there with you. You know, they're if they're cheering for you, they're not just cheering for you, but you can almost, in the way they react, you can almost hear them coaching you. You know, like, yeah, keep going. Their voice, the mood of the crowd would change as you try and progress on a certain technique. You know, and you feel it coming. You can hear them telling you, yeah, go. You're on the right path. You know, my fight with Sakuraba, that was very much part of it too. It's, you know, me and him, we went move for move, back and forth. You know, it was an awesome grappling match. You know, we did grapple a lot in that fight, and I you know, when I think back at it too, for me to be able to go in there and again hold my own against another top fighter like that, and doing that in Japan, it was a real sign to me that, you know, I mean, you're good at this, man. You're good at this. Keep going. You're good at this, and you're not just dreaming. You're doing it here. You're here for real, doing it. And Sakuraba was a very, very respectful opponent. You know, when we see one another to this day, it's always smiles and great memories. And you know, again, that fight took me back to when I fought Eric Paulson. When I see Eric now, we literally laugh. Those are great memories. Yeah, because my abilities today and so forth would not be possible without those guys.
And you defeated Renzo Gracie there, which was a pretty big victory. How did it feel being one of the Gracies in Pride?
That was weird. And to put it, I guess, bluntly, because when I fought Renzo, one of the guys in his corner was Hughes. And yeah, I remember the first time rolling with Hughes, I was like 16 years old. And here I am in front of like 60,000 people. And there's that dude that, you know, I rolled with. In that earlier question you asked me, there's that dude I rolled with standing across from me in the other opponent's corner. I'm thinking, how the hell did I get here? You know, not too long ago, I was a little kid getting spanked by these guys, and yeah, I got, either I'm ready for this or I bit off a little too much. That's what I felt like.
Now, we talked to Gary Goodridge, and I've heard some interviews with Phil Baroni that have fought in Pride, and they were saying there was sometimes pressure on North Americans to get paid more if they would lose to a Japanese fighter. Did you ever notice anything like that in those days?
I think, early on in Pride and so forth, as it was developing, I think, there may have been some instances where guys were kind of pressured, or I've heard grumblings of guys being made offers and so forth. But that was always just a select few guys. I think there was another group of guys who the Japanese, didn't want to. No one wanted to interfere with that. It was lose or win. These guys, the samurais are, there was like a bunch of us who were like the samurai warriors that were just left alone to do our thing, and there was no idea of any interference, because win or lose to that person, its value is that it was an honorable match, right? And anyone that did that, I think, when you look back at some of the fights, you can tell which ones were and you can tell which ones weren't. And that's where, again, the sport of mixed martial arts was in a stage of evolution, to the point where, yes, fights are they're much more heavily influenced now by the promoters than they ever were back then. Just by the very nature of the sport's structure, the promoters have a say in every aspect of that fighter's career, right down to, when you train, who you fight against, where you're going to fight, and so forth. These things have a tremendous effect on the outcome of a fight. All right, so the interference by promoters, to me, is much greater now, and it has nothing to do with to me. But when a guy can call someone up and give them a stipend for 6 months to train, and then call their opponent and say, "Hey, in 2 weeks, I want you to fight this guy, take it or leave it," well, you're greatly influencing the fight. Right? When you approach it from that perspective, you're without a doubt greatly influencing the fight. And in Japan, competing in Pride and so forth, that didn't happen often. Fighting in Japan, the idea that some guys were paid to throw fights and so forth, I think that happened in a certain category of fights where you got a professional wrestler against a seasoned MMA fighter, and the professional wrestler wins. Well, if you can't figure out you're watching wrestling, well, the joke's on you. What can I say? But when it came to the actual fighters, the guys who had real fight records and so forth, that type of thing, it didn't happen.
And you ended up jumping to UFC. I guess they must have seen you in Pride and they made you an offer.
Well, when I went over to the UFC, I was still competing for Pride. It's just, as the UFC monopoly grew, as other aspects of the sport were killed off by them or bought off by them to be killed off by them, eventually everyone just ended up fighting for the UFC.
Your first UFC appearance, I guess, was in a tournament format. Were you at all nervous, thinking that you might have to fight numerous times? I think you ended up fighting twice, but that's a lot to take on in one night.
Yeah, we definitely were not only pioneers, but I guess, for lack of a better word, they don't make it like that anymore. Yeah, guys don't do 2 fights in one night anymore. When you think back about it and you give it some thought, there's a good reason why. All right, it's a good reason why. And the tournament format was pretty intense, competing in the middleweight tournament. To me, both my opponents were really tough opponents, especially Dan Anderson. That guy, to this day, to me, he's still the toughest guy I've ever fought. And still one of the toughest guys in the sport. He's just a machine. And you know, to fight in a tournament format where your final match is against someone like him, I wasn't, you know, worried about injury or anything like that. I was just like trying my best to live up to that level of intensity. It's such intense competition. You know, again, the way this current the current state of mixed martial arts right now doesn't allow for that level of intensity. You know, now the fights are pretty much, I guess, dictated by the promoter to some degree. You know, the outcome is greatly influenced by that, and you know, guys are really just hoping they don't get cut. They're just hoping that they have a chance and opportunity. I was lucky to have opportunity because when I won, I got the opportunity. It's not so much the case anymore. You can win every fight, and if you're not willing to concede certain things in your contract, you just don't get a chance.
You defeated Pat Militek for the welterweight title in UFC to make you the first Canadian and I guess UK citizen to ever hold a UFC title. How tough was that match, and what did it feel like to win the title?
It was a really like that match really culminated or it took everything that I learned to win that match. It did. It took a lot of a certain degree of patience. It took a certain degree of, you know, strategic thinking, a certain level of knowledge, and, you know, physical fitness. That fight took everything, you know, that I've learned and everything I had at that time to win. It was, you know, I wasn't worried about it, but the only thing I ever gave a guy credit for having an advantage on me was experience. You can't train it into you in the gym. You just acquire it as life goes on. You know, as your fight career goes on, fight by fight, as it goes on, you acquire it. And Pat had a lot more of that than I did. And, you know, for me, his most dangerous weapon was his level of experience. And, you know, I tried my best to not let that, you know, worry me. You know, I controlled my breathing all day. And just kept my cool and said, you know, stay focused, stick to my game. And if, you know, if my game needs to change while I'm in there, change it. You know, but again, there's only one rule: win, get the job done. And you know, while I was in there, I found a way, and I made it happen.
And the fight after that, of course, was a highly controversial fight against Matt Hughes. Could you tell us a bit about that fight, and do you think you were ripped off at all in the finish?
I made the mistake for, you know, not for bad reasons. You know, they had my safety, you know, front and center as, you know, their most important thing they were dealing with at the time. In that process of dealing with that, they missed certain things, you know, that in hindsight was obvious, but in all the commotion and all the excitement, you know, a mistake was made, and they gave him the victory, and you know, I won the fight. Yeah.
Do you think that's something that the commission should have looked into a little more?
Oh yeah, sure, but hey, it makes no difference in the course of history, of course of anything, that whether they kept the decision that way or changed it that way. Well, the only thing that probably would have affected it was my pride, but I don't have much of that, so it wouldn't have happened either way. You know, we did have a rematch. We fought in London, England, and he won that fight fair and square.
Okay.
And you know, again, that was a very awesome fight. He gave me kudos after the fight. I remember one thing he told me. He goes, "Carlos, I never will fight you again." And I just laughed. I say, yeah, I get it, man. I could be pretty tenacious. And, you know, for me and Matt too, it was a great time. You know, up to this day, we see one another. We know we're like bulls trying to share the same pen, and you know, we can't help act the way we act. You know, not out of any negativity or anything. We like being good at what we do, and I think there's a healthy respect between the two of us for that reason.
Would you say that Matt may have been the best amateur wrestler you would have fought in your career?
The best amateur wrestler I would have fought, that would have been Dan Anderson. Yeah. That guy was a bugger, man. Yeah, well, Matt, definitely a great amateur wrestler, right? And yeah, I will say definitely one of the strongest guys I've fought. Yeah, but at that level of competition, they're all felt freakishly strong. You know, they probably say the same thing about me, but yeah, you can't really feel your own strength. You know, all you could really feel is resistance, and they had a lot of resistance. You know.
Just to touch on that for a second, how big a part of your training regime was your strength training?
I'll say in the beginning when I was younger, it didn't play that much of a part. And then as I got older and as I got bigger, you know, we started to train it more, tried to exploit it more. Because, you know, for guys, we just get thicker and broader, or you know, our body muscle mass increases as we get older. So as you start acquiring these new assets, you gotta learn how to use them, right? So as my career went on, strength training and so forth became a bigger part of it.
And you ended up going into the IFL as a coach and a fighter. How did that jump come about? I think you were telling me off camera that they actually paid more than UFC at the time.
Yeah, the IFL was a great opportunity. You know, it was a publicly traded company. They had a, you know, I guess novel concept in that we've competed as a teams, you know, 5-on-5 throughout the night. You know, that was, I guess, you know, it was a novel thing. Did it really make a big difference? No, because at the end of the day, you're always still the only guy in the ring against another guy. And team or no team, you're in there by yourself, right? So when it came down to the nitty gritty, it was more of the same. It was just, you know, again, another promoter trying to get as many fighters as they could to come and compete for them.
What do you think the failure of the IFL was ultimately?
The failure of the IFL, part of it is, yeah, you know, the way they went about trying to get fighters to compete for them and so forth was too little too late. You know, the way MMA is structured in such a way that it leads to a monopoly by default. When you have promoters who have their own title and have athletes under contract with them, eventually if those promoters have exclusive contracts, eventually every athlete's going to have to compete for one promoter. So the IFL just came about too little, too late. And again, I stress, you know, it wouldn't have mattered if it was the IFL that came first or second. The way the sport's structured is that whoever came first ends up with a monopoly, right? All the fighters end up having to compete, or at least all the top fighters have to compete for the same top title, right? You don't have multiple titles that are recognized because you can't. Every promoter has exclusive contracts, so it's impossible. And you know, the chance to go out there and compete for other titles now it's impossible. You know, especially if you want to be able to compete for the title that matters. Well, there's only one, so it's impossible to want to go and compete for other guys. Because even if you could, why would you want to? Right? So That's what killed the IFL. It's just the way the sport's structured. It's structured in such an anti-competitive way that if you weren't the promoter that got in there first, locked up enough athletes, put the money behind the branding so that the public only recognizes your title, it's like it creates like a network effect. You just end up with more and more and more and more of a monopoly over time. And the only way to break it is, we need to have a structure like boxing or a structure like tennis. The tennis structure doesn't work in prize fighting because if it did, it would be present in boxing. Right? And when you put all these market forces together, the proper structure is one where there's a sanctioning body and there's promoters with exclusive contracts and titles and rankings and all these things. All these decision-making aspects of the sport are done through competition, and they're independent of any vested interest. To me, it's only when we have sport like that can you see other promoters thrive and survive. So because that's not the state of affairs, that's what killed the IFL. That's what killed every other promotion.
And the thing you're talking about now, that has to do with the big class action lawsuit against the UFC that's happening, I guess.
Yeah, the class action lawsuit is something I started and pursued. And yeah, we know what's happening. And the purposes of that class action lawsuit is to correct these structural problems within the sport. And actually make it a real sport where guys can actually compete and, as of right, be able to earn what they're supposed to earn based on what the market is willing to bear, not what the promoter is willing to give you and what you're willing to take. It's wrong.
What do you think about the whole Reebok deal with UFC?
Well, again, this is a result of the marketplace, where all the leverage and so forth is given to a monopoly that can dictate terms. And at the end of the day, Reebok, their interest is not in the fighters and so forth. Their interest is in promoting their brand. And the same thing with the UFC. Their interest is promoting them. They run the business in such a way that instead of them promoting the fighters, they're actually locking up fighters to promote them. That's why they're able to sell things like t-shirts, gear, drinks, memorabilia. That's why they're actually able to sell tickets for a UFC show before there's even fighters announced for the card. If it was properly structured, that wouldn't be possible. No one could ever sell a boxing show without telling people who's fighting. It's impossible. It'll never happen. Just that alone is a perfect market test, proof of a monopoly, or a scenario where the athletes are actually promoting the UFC instead of the UFC actually promoting the athletes. All right, because when an athlete is in the UFC and they say, "Hey, I'm gonna go fight for someone else," they can't take a lot of things with them, right? They can't even give that other promoter the opportunity to say, "Hey, come watch our show because we have the current or former UFC champion fighting in our show." The other promoter can't even do that. All right, so these are anti-competitive aspects of the sport that are totally killing the sport, and the purpose of an antitrust lawsuit is to fix that.
And what do you think about the recent sale of the UFC?
The recent sale of the UFC, that's just, to me, somebody bought a rotten egg. Those guys jumped ship. That's all that is. They sold it at they chose the right time to sell it. Because they know that the structure that's there right now cannot self-sustain itself. No monopoly can self-sustain itself. Monopolies are dangerous because they, by their very nature, eventually destroy everything, including themselves. When you have nothing to keep something in check in the natural world or any market or in any other artificially conceived world, when there's no competition to keep it in check, it destroys everything. All right, and that's what's happening right now.
Do you think that Floyd Mayweather is actually going to go into MMA?
No, Floyd's never going to go into MMA. No. Floyd Mayweather would never go into MMA. These are just, aspects of marketing and promoting, self-promotion that, it's like, I don't know, reading the National Enquirer for some people. And for other people, it's just, they're not interested in nothing that's in the National Enquirer.
Brock Lesnar, I guess, technically he didn't win his last 3 UFC fights because he failed the drug test on the last one, as it was ultimately ruled a draw. In the other 2, he was knocked out in the first round, and now there's rumors that he's going to go back to UFC. Do you think that would be a wise decision for him?
For Brock, to me, because of the way the sport's structured, some athletes would have never survived in a really competitive environment. Would Brock Lesnar have made it to the top of the UFC rankings if the UFC actually had real rankings? If the sport was free and open to every athlete to compete? I don't know about that. All right? But right now, the way it is, if they're willing to give him an opportunity, and again, I emphasize, if they are willing to give him an opportunity, that's just the way the sport is right now. If I was him, I'll take it.
What do you think his chances are of being successful if he's put in there with a competitive fighter?
If he's put in there with a real fighter, his chances are not good. I'll just say that frankly. But at the end of the day, it's up to the promoter whether or not he's going to be successful. If they want him to look successful in the eyes of the fans, well, dude, they can write that story all day long. They've been doing it for decades. They handpick every fight. If they wanted to put Brock in there against someone he can beat, they very easily do that. And Brock would have to say thank you. If they wanted to put him in there against someone that he's going to lose against, well, Brock has 2 questions. Really he only has 2 choices. Either ask for more money to do it, or say no. That's it.
And one other wrestler I have to ask you about, because it's been highly controversial, the opportunity he was given, I guess he's going to be getting another one soon, is CM Punk. What do you think of him in the UFC getting another shot, apparently?
No, that's just indicative of what I've been saying. It's not sport. This is just professional wrestling where guys actually hurt one another for real. That's all. And quite frankly, when you look at sports legislation and the history of how prize fighting was regulated, to have prize fighting just for the sake of guys fighting, it's illegal. You can't just, put up an arena somewhere and say, hey guys, come and fight, just for the sake of it. The government should not be sanctioning cockfighting. The government should be sanctioning sport. And from where we came years ago, we've gone back, way back in time.
And after the IFL, you did have, I think, 3 more fights, a couple in Ontario and one in Australia. Is there any reason why you never went back to one of the bigger promotions after that?
Well, the last fight actually in Australia, I lost that fight. I won the fight, but I lost the fight. The judges gave it to the other guy, but I clearly, I felt I won the fight. And you know what? That happens, But when you fight a guy in his own backyard. But again, would have happened if I was in a marketplace that actually really existed, because I was the bigger name, I was the bigger draw. If it was a real sport like boxing, he would have had to fight me in my own backyard. And if he wanted to beat me, he would really have to beat me. Right? But sport's not structured like that. It's structured in such a way that the promoters have every lever to their disposal to pull. And again, why did I not continue fighting in the sport after that? I said, no, not gonna happen. I'm like, you know what? Another good reason why I didn't is the show that happened in Australia, that fight where I fought in Australia, many of us didn't get paid for it. I do not recall getting paid the full amount that I contracted to fight for. And after that too, I just basically said, yeah, I'm done with this. This sport has gone downhill, way downhill from where it last was. And I realized, you know what, I'm going to have to put my time and energy into something else. At the same time, I'll come back and I'll try to help make the sport better and build it properly.
And speaking of not getting paid for fighting, prior to the recent changes in Ontario with the commissions, they used to allow amateur MMA events where fighters wouldn't be wearing headgear, and basically they'd be having pro fights and they wouldn't be getting paid anything because they would be called amateur fights and the promoter would just collect all the money. What do you think about that type of thing, and what do you think is going to have to happen for there to be a real commission for amateur MMA in Ontario?
For the sport to have a real commission, for the sport to be a real sport, you have to start to separate titles from promoters. When you have a promoter who has their own title, you end up exactly what we're discussing. Professional wrestling where guys hurt one another for real. Without that, you have no actual form of competition within the sport. You have no ability to rank fighters. Fighters have no way to fight freely, openly, independently. Promoters don't have the ability to actually compete for the services of fighters, right? And what happens too is you create a marketplace where all the different business interests in that marketplace can't thrive, can't survive, can't actually do business. So when you cannot have regulated competition between the athletes, it's impossible for there to also be some type of regulated competition between all the different service providers of between the commerce and the sport. It won't survive. You can't do it. You have conflict of interest, right? And even for the athletic commissions, there ends up being a conflict of interest, and it becomes ungovernable.
And a question one of your fans wanted me to ask you was, is it true you were a lifeguard at North York City Center at the same time you were having big MMA fights?
Yeah, I was. I was in university also. I wrote my exams in psychology when I came back with my title.
So you were very good at time management?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at connecting it all. You know, training my mind, training my body, same thing.
And you're still coaching MMA. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your school?
Yeah, well, you know, school's located in Pickering, 631 Liverpool Road. Brand new building, purpose built for that purpose. It's training the next generation of martial artists and, you know, members of our society that'll make a difference and make this place a better world to live in. You know, and, you know, James Newton MMA, or you can check me out at newtonmma.com. But, yeah, we just recently opened, and I guess it's the start of a new journey for me. I am now officially a teacher, I guess.
And as a teacher, for any aspiring MMA fighters watching this, what would be the most important advice you could give them as far as preparing for a fight?
Preparing for a fight. Well, again, I have to go back to control your breathing. Keeps your mind clear, keeps you calm, you know, stops you from believing your own hype, and keeps you grounded, keeps you humble, level-headed, you know, gives you sound mind, sound judgment. It gives you the place, puts you in that place where you make everything possible, which is the present moment. You know, it keeps you from dwelling too much on the past, and you don't worry about the future. You just do what you gotta do right there and now. And yeah, I find controlling your breathing is if I was to tell someone where to start, that's a place to start. You know, because if you can't draw breath, you're not gonna go anywhere.
And what is your opinion on jiu-jitsu with the gi versus no gi if you're training for MMA? Should you be training in a gi or without?
I think it's important to know both. Both allow you to contrast, you know, what you know and what you don't know. You know, both allow you to develop your approach to a situation in a multi-dimensional way. You know, if all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, well then every problem looks like a nail, and you know that's not a good place to to approach things from.
And finally, one person I'll ask you about that I didn't ask you about before is Dana White. What your opinion of him is as a person?
Dana as a person, Dana's cool, man. Dana is, I think he's still same old Dana White. You know, I'm sure he's, you know, got newfound problems with all that money. You know, I'm sure, you know, if you don't know how to manage your lifestyle and so forth, you can, I guess, it can bring some headaches. You know, but you know, money doesn't make you buy happiness; it just makes doing certain things easier. But for some people, easy is not what makes them happy.
And do you have any social media or anything where people can follow you?
Yeah, NewtonMMA.com. You know, from there you can find our Facebook or Instagram and so forth, and you know, hit me up, send me messages, and yeah, check out the school. That's the place to find me.
And to close this off, is there any message you want to say to your fans?
Hey, looking forward to building the next generation of super awesome martial artists. You know, and for my fans, you know, I really appreciated all the support over the years, and looking forward to you guys supporting our sport as we build it.